Jolas, do you want to show the slides? I'm looking at SPSS at the moment.
Can you see it?
Perfect. Lovely. Thank you.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second of today's webinars from Smart Vision Europe. In this webinar, we're talking about all the different techniques that one can bring to bear for dealing with problems in data and general data cleaning tasks using SPSS statistics. Again, if you haven't joined, some people may have not joined any of these webinars before, you should be aware that we do record them, so you'll be able to listen to them again afterwards. There is some slideware, not a lot, but if you want to copy the slides, we email a link out to you so you can download those materials after the session's ended. And if there's stuff here which is particularly useful for colleagues who were unable to attend today, it may be possible for us to arrange a rerun of the session. Best thing to do is just to send us an email, give us a call, and let us know, and we'll see what we can do. With regard to asking questions, all the lines are muted, so I can't hear you, but if you use the chat facility, my colleague Rachel, who's also on here, will field those questions. Generally speaking, we follow up offline afterwards with people so that we can address them properly. And bear in mind that you can also email us after the session has ended, should any questions arise, anything you should think of afterwards. By all means, do so. We'll be happy to address them. If you don't know who Smart Vision are, we are a technology organization. We're a gold accredited partner to IBM, who own SPSS. Also Predictive Solutions, who provide a version of SPSS solutions, and also Data Robot. And basically, we specialize in statistics, advanced analytics, data science, AI type technologies, though we do work with open source technologies. And we're a small organization with a very deep history of analytical technology in the software industry, stretching back 30 years. I think I started working with Rachel in about 1994, 95. So we've been working away in that industry for some time, and that means we've got a lot of experience of applying these types of technologies. It's these types of techniques, analysis and data cleaning, etc., across many different sectors and many different applications down the decades. And today we are talking about errors and problems in data, and the issue of data cleaning. And the point here, of course, is that data cleaning is an almost universal problem for anybody who deals with data. These days, with SPSS users, increasingly they're dealing with data that has been collected in formats which aren't native to SPSS. So they're using SurveyMonkey. They've got Excel files. They've got Qualtrics surveys. They've got databases that they're connected to. They've got a lot of different, they've got JSON files, they've got loads of different formats that data is appearing in. And that means that when it gets to SPSS, they often have to do something to format the data or get it into shape so that it makes sense to that particular system. And that being said, sometimes you still get errors and irrelevancies that occur in data, just basic stuff like a keystroke that's wrong, somebody literally typing in the wrong age, inconsistencies in recording information between different data entry operators. That's actually still very common. And if you're getting information off a database or something like that, somebody's giving you an extract of data, you suddenly realize that they're encoding information, or the way in which they encode a region code or something like that changes over time because they've somebody else has decided to input the data slightly differently. They get information that's collected which just isn't relevant to that particular analysis that you're doing. It's got subjects or it's got rows of data in there which aren't necessary, and being able to remove them can be useful. You get issues around mismatches between database tables. This is a really common issue where, if you're doing a join, if you're asking somebody to give you some data from the database, from the warehouse, and you say, I want, I don't know, transactional data for the past 2 years or so to do some analysis, you'll often find that you have people and their customers where you have no transaction history. And you may even have situations where you have transaction history but no customers. And those obviously can cause issues when it comes to the analysis process, and therefore, it need to be addressed. And just differences in how various systems encode information. One of the biggest bugbears tends to be date and time fields. Every system seems to have a different way of encoding a date and time field, whether it be Excel or SAS or SQL or SurveyMonkey or SPSS. And a very common problem that people have to deal with in SPSS is just trying to get the date fields formatted correctly. To be fair, it makes a pretty good guess at dealing with them, but we'll look at a couple of methods we can use to address problems or errors in data time fields. So typical tasks that we're going to deal with are things like identifying records where you have a high percentage of missing values. Of course, that's an issue. You'll have many fields that have a few missing values and a few fields that have a lot of missing values, and being able to discriminate one against the other is pretty important. Stuff where you have got just too much variability to do any analysis with. That could be things like a product code, where you've just got too many unique codes. You've got like 10,000 records, and the codes occur only 2 or 3 times for each occurrence, and can't really do much with that in that format. You got to group them together in some way. Sometimes you have too little variability. I still get data sent to me where 99% of the values in a column belong to one group, or sometimes 100% of the values in one column belong to one group, and you just don't need that column in there because it doesn't tell you anything. There's no variability. Correcting values that are out of range, though non-legitimate range, people who are aged 199 or people who have, -7 years of employment or something like that, doesn't make any sense. So how to spot that and how to deal with it. Duplications, of course, identifying duplicate records. Ensuring that variables are correctly formatted. This is one of the biggest issues for people who are analyzing data in SPSS where the data has been collected elsewhere. SPSS has a very particular way in which it wants to format data. It has a way in which it tries to guess what is the correct format for a field and how it should be represented. And being able to spot that field has been incorrectly formatted is a bit of an art, and it's something that you build up with experience over time. We're going to be looking at some examples of that, but it could be something as simple as just removing decimal places from age and checking that values in combinations of variables don't contradict each other. You'll often get situations where the values aren't in error in the sense that they're outside of a range of acceptable values, but where they contradict one another. So you get contradictions like car drivers who are under 17 years old or something like that, and the logical relationship. So being able to create a rule that will spot that is quite useful. And lastly, creating syntax that allows you to correct data issues automatically. So if you're reading data on a regular basis and you're having to clean it on a regular basis, you don't want to deal with the onerous task of doing this manually every single time. You want to be able to record that and code it in some way. Syntax is a good way to do that. It's also really good if you've got a lot of fields in a new data set and they've all got the same issue, and you don't want to manually have to click on each one and fix that issue one at a time. A syntax command can fix all of them in one go, and it's a very useful and powerful way to deal with those types of issues. So there are two broad classes of data errors in SPSS. Most issues tend to fall into one of these two categories. One is where data formatting issues are caused by how the data was stored in other systems. And the second issue deals with problems with the data file itself. It's been caused by human error or systematic failure. So date and time variables, identifying and defining missing values, attaching meaningful labels to variables, making sure that they're the correct type of variable, the correct, what we call level of measurement. Dealing with variable names is a real common issue. These are all formatting issues. And then problems of the data itself deal with actual errors in the data, inconsistencies, duplicates, illogical relationships, etc. Okay. With that in mind, let's look at the first bit here. The first section we're going to be looking at data formatting problems. So if I'll just go to SPSS, just jump out of SPSS, and we'll open up a data set. So I've got a data set here. If you were in the last session, you'll recognize this data set. This is a version of the employee data set, famous employee data set, which was used to record information about employees of a bank in the 1980s in Chicago. And this is a version of it where it's just got an absolute plethora of problems associated with it. It's got, all the columns have got some sort of issue, more or less, with them. And we've got to be able to work our way through those issues and identify them and try to fix them. So one of the first things you're going to notice when you open up a new data set, you import it into SPSS. Maybe you've gone to File, Open, and opened the data from a CSV file. Maybe you've gone to import an Excel file or import a database. It comes in as raw data very often. It doesn't have value labels or anything like that because the system that you're importing it from doesn't understand things like value labels or variable labels, which are kind of specific to SPSS. But one of the most common issues you'll get are variable names. So you can see there's a variable name here. We can guess what this variable's about because if I right click on it and just do some descriptive statistics, and I tend to do this a lot for checking data, just using the right click descriptive statistics command. I mean, I can see that this is it's got the label employment category and it's called, a clerical, custodial, manager, intern. So I can kind of guess that this is about job categories. But the way in which that might come about is simply due to the fact that SPSS is quite fussy about field names, and more so than other systems. It's quite old-fashioned about it. It doesn't like, for example, spaces. It doesn't like hyphens or dashes or slashes or anything like that. All the variable names have to begin with a letter. You can have numbers in there, but they've got to begin with a letter. So you can imagine how if you import a field name that was called job category or something like that, and it had a space in it, SPSS, depending on how the import was working, depending on what method you were using, and depending on the file format, it might not try to preserve that field name. It might just call it the default field name, which is var001. And if there was more than one of those types of field names, you'd get var001, var002, var003, etc. And you'd have to go through each one of them and rename them. Now, one way in which you can do that is you can just double click on the header. Generally speaking, if you want to go into the formatting of these fields and look at the formatting menu, you just double click on it. That takes you to the variable view here. Then just double click on it and say, okay, I'm going to call this job cat and just edit it like that. As I said, the syntax commands are very powerful when dealing with these types of issues because you might have a whole list. You might have like 30 or 40 different fields where you want to do that. You want to rename them, in which case it's useful to know that just a few little syntax commands that can do with that. One is simply a command called rename. So you can see if I type this in, it starts to kind of guess. There's a command there called rename variables. And rename variables is where you put the name of the current variable. In this case, you can see it even guessing what it's called, job cat. You give it a new name. Let's say we were going to rename it to job role. Do that. Full stop. And then just run it. And when we come back here, we can see this is now called job role. Bear in mind that you could do this with a whole list of variables. So you could have, if you had like var001, var002, var003, you could just list them all and then just list what their correct new names should be in order. So you can see how doing that in syntax would be a lot less onerous than manually clicking on them. Bear in mind also that you can paste in the names of fields. If you go to the variables list here, you can see it's just paste in the name of a field there. And if I just run that, it just changes it back to job count. So it's a really simple command. It's not a very complicated command. It's just rename variables. And you should also bear in mind that if you can kind of guess what the command's going to be, like for example, if I type in variable, you can see it starts to show me all the different commands we did: variable labels, variable level, variable role, variable width. So I tend to have, when I've got raw data, big raw data file, and I'm fixing it or doing some consultancy, I tend to have a lot of variable width. Variable width is just where the variable, the width of the display width appears like that. You get a lot of that when it's read in. And rather than me just manually going through and kind of resizing them, I just have a variable width command as a syntax, and I say, look, set all of these variables to the same width, and it just makes it much neater and cleaner. So there's one simple approach to this. What else can we see? Well, you're usually looking across the top here, the headers, and seeing for anything that looks weird or doesn't look right. So here's a common issue. You will sometimes see these little symbols which don't really match the type of field that it is. This is a nominal symbol. There's only 3 of these symbol types. If you look along the end here, you can see there's nominal fields, scale fields, and ordinal fields. Ordinal fields means a ranking field, like a rating scale, like a satisfaction, where there's an order. Nominal means where they're categories and the order isn't important. And scale simply means it's a scale field. And obviously, we want to change this to a scale field because this is numbers, and that's what scales look like. And the reason we want to do that is because if we do an analysis on this, you can see that it thinks it's a category. So it gives us this nonsensical table. So, it won't treat that variable or that field correctly unless we change the level of measurement of it, what's called the level of measurement, to its correct level. So I could do that. I could click at the scale here. I could just say scale. Or alternatively, as I mentioned earlier, I'm just again going to show you a syntax command here that'll do that. So if I go variable, again, really simple one, variable level. If you don't know what comes after this, and sometimes I forget, you can just highlight that and click on the syntax help, and it will show you an example of the variable level command. So here's the variable level command here. It's saying, there you go, a whole bunch of fields here. So just turn them all to scale, sales 95 and sales 96. So in this case, I just need to put the name of the field and put scale after it. So I'd say, okay, what's the name of the field? Oh, I can't remember. Well, let's go to utilities variables. It's this one here, current salary. Paste that in, and in it goes. And put it in twice, and just put the word scale afterwards, full stop, and run that. And it's turned it to a scale, and now it treats it appropriately. So we can see it showing minimum, maximum values, the mean values, and the median value, because that's the correct formatting for that type of field. Okay. What else can we see? Well, again, I do tend to right click on things just to check them as I'm going along and as I'm working my way down through them. We actually have a field here, age, and I can see there's a value -9 there. So I'm wondering about that. I'm right clicking on it and hitting descriptive statistics. And here we can see that -9 is seen as a legitimate value within the age variable. And as a result of that, it's going to affect the mean. In fact, it says there are 3 missing values in there. So there actually are 3 occurrences where there's a null value, if you like, but it still sees -9 as a legitimate value. And obviously you can't be -9 years old. What could I do about it? Well, I could actually do so, as we'll see later on, you could actually run a command that would check the date of birth and calculate their age. You could actually do that and overwrite that, which would be an intelligent way to deal with it. But assuming you didn't have date of birth, you might say, okay, look, I'm going to guess that's a missing value. You often see values like 99 or 98 or -99 and -98, indicating that they're missing values. In which case, I would simply go to the missing value column here in the variable view for the variable age. You can see how I got there just by double clicking on it. Go to missing values and type in 9, and it assigns a missing value to that. Right click on it again. It doesn't disappear. It just means that it's, oh, hold on, I must have done it wrong. Hold on. Did I put it in? Missing value 9, discrete missing value 9. Let's have a look here. Still sees it as missing. Is it because it's decimal places, age of employee, 9? It is strange it's putting decimal places after. I did think that was a bit odd. Let's try again. I haven't seen that before. Let's try. Isn't treating it as missing. That maybe I'm doing something wrong there. That's kind of strange. I'll have a little think about it and maybe come back to it in a moment. But what I did want to say was there is another way to do this, which of course is via the syntax command, which is where you call up a syntax window and you have a command called missing values. Let me try it this way. Again, you want to look up the command for that and see an example of how it's applied. You can see it's missing values here. V1 brackets 8, 9 in this case. You can have more than one missing value, so I should be able to do this. I haven't seen that before. Let's have a look at it. This coming out as 9. I'm not going mad here. But still insisting that the minimum value is -9. Sorry, I know you're all screaming at me. I'm putting in my 9, not -9. That's fine. Excuse me. Typical error. Right, now it takes it out. So there you go. I've got 9 on the brain. So -9 is the missing value, not 9. And as a result of that, it takes out minimum. The minimum value is 20. The maximum value is 62. And it does affect the mean slightly. Just changes it ever so slightly. So, dealing with these weird values is, is an important control that you should have within SPSS and being able to identify them and take them out so that they're not involved in calculations. We've got another field here which has a number of problems associated with it. We've got a field here called job time. And I can see just from looking at this field, job time has first of all, it looks like it's treating it as a category field, and it's actually the number of months employed. These people are months since hire. Secondly, it's got a tiny little A symbol next to it, indicating that it is a string field. So it's a string category field. And those are denoted by these X values. You can see these X values in here. They're obviously indicating that data is missing. We don't really want it to be a string field, though. It doesn't make any sense that that would be a string field. I can make these disappear just by forcing it to become a numeric field. It will keep the numbers and it will turn these strings into what I call system missing, which are basically nulls. So there you go. I just double clicked on it. I just forced it, changed it from a string to numeric, which is kind of default. And I could also change the level of measurement, of course, to scale because there's a scale field. And then we have job time as descriptive statistics running from 63 to 98, indicating that this data set, I guess these people had to be employed at least 5 years. 63 months was the minimum number of months that they had. But what about the actual missing values itself? Well, I guess you could just leave them like that. There is something you should bear in mind, though, is that there is a procedure that you can run which allows you to replace missing values. You can see it down here under transform, replace missing values. And if I put this field in there, which is months since hire, if you can't find it, just right click, there it is, job time in there. You can see that, first of all, it's going to force me to create a new version of it. Calls it job time 1. Let's just call that job time 2. Hit change. And it says I'm going to replace it with the series mean. If I click that, you'll see it here. So there's my series mean. You can see what the series mean was. It was 81. So I could just, delete this. I could delete that. And I could move this, click this and just move it and just drag it. Should just be able to drag it along there and change it now, rename it to job time. Again, do all of this in syntax if I wanted to. Reorder it, rename it, apply missing values to it. There is something you should be aware of, though, when I'm replacing with series mean. First of all, it is a hell of an assumption to just say, well, I'm going to guess that the missing value is the average, which is quite a big assumption. Sometimes you kind of have to do that for for practical purposes because there's a procedure you're running which doesn't like missing values. Sometimes that happens. It's actually this particular procedure here of transform and create time series. Sorry, not create time series. Transform, replace missing values. It's next to the time series command here because it is associated with time series analysis. It's usually, you can see it says series mean. It kind of assumes that the data is a series of points, like you're collecting data, you're collecting values over time. It's a time trend where the order is important. Here, the order isn't important, but if it was a time trend data, then you might use the series mean, but you might also use something like the mean of the nearby points. So that would take the average of the nearby points, and therefore you're kind of interpolating. And that's what that procedure is really for. But bear in mind that you can't just overwrite a missing value with a series mean if you got a good reason to do that. Okay, let's turn to the dreaded issues with date and time fields that you tend to get when you import data from one system into another. It's not just the SPSS that suffers from this. Lots of problems. Lots of data systems really try very hard to guess how to represent date and times when they've been imported from other systems. One of the reasons that this is the case is because date and time fields are usually encoded in the number of seconds elapsed from a certain point in time. So, for example, in Excel, a date and time field is encoded as the number of seconds elapsed since the 1st of the 1st, 1900. In SAS, a number of seconds elapsed since the 1st of the 1st, 1960. And in SPSS, it's something like the 14th of October, 1582, which is the introduction of Gregorian time. They all pick some sort of arbitrary start point, and they turn the date into seconds from that point in time, and then they reformat it into days, months, and years. And that of course can lead to problems when you're converting from one field to the next. Now, if I look at this one here, I can see that the issue here is that this is seeing this as a string field. It's also nominal, so the little a value here, this is not being seen as a true date or time field. It just sees it as a series of categories which have these descriptions with them. So that's not a true date and time field. There is something you should bear in mind, is that sometimes you can just get away with forcing it to convert it to a date or time. And sometimes SPSS will accept that. It'll do it properly. I think in this occasion, even though I tried to come up with one which it wouldn't know how to interpret, it would interpret as a string, it actually still manages to convert it to a date or time. So let me show you how you might do that. I would recommend that you start by creating a blank column, and you can do that simply by clicking on the column, right-clicking, and then saying, insert variable or something like that. I think I can do insert variable here. Insert variable, there you go. You can see that new variables, of course, are given this name var001. And I could just Control C, just copy, copy and paste, and then paste that in there. So there it is, there's a copy of it. It's called var001. We can just double click on it and call it DOB2. And even give it a little label called date of birth. Yeah. And then once it's done that, I could, again, double clicking on it, I could try and force it to convert it to a date field. Sometimes you get away with this. You can see that here are the formats. Will it know how to do that? Well, this is day, month means that if it's got 3 M's in the middle, it means the month is a description, like Feb for February, Jan for January, rather than a number like 01 or 02. And obviously the full year being shown here. Let's see if it works. Click OK. Or does it just return blanks? No, it's actually worked. I mean, it actually sees it as a nominal field. It hasn't changed that, so I'd still have to change it back to scale, which is what a true date field is. And you can also see there's this tiny little symbol next to it, which just indicates that it's a date field. And you can see that when I hover my mouse cursor over it, it says it's date field. So, that's one way to fix it. Let's say that wasn't available to me. And I wanted to reformat this. There is a little trick you've got, which is really, really useful in SPSS, which is under transform, the date and time wizard. And date and time wizard For example, here it says learn how date and times are represented in SPSS statistics. If I click on that, it says, numeric, these are numeric variables of special display formats. The numeric value of a date or time is the number of seconds since midnight, October 14th, 1582. So it's actually the introduction of Gregorian time. Gives you a little bit of information about that. You can do stuff like, calculating the dates and times. If you needed to take one date away, one value away from another, if you wanted to calculate these people's date of birth, age today, you could take away the date of birth from today's date. You could extract part of a date of time. Let's say that you just wanted to pull out the month that this information was recorded in. You could do that. You can create date and time variable from variables holding parts of date and times. That means if you import data and the fields day, month, and year have come in separately, and you want to combine them together into a date and time field, that'll help you do that. And this one here, create a date or time variable from a string containing a date or time. Well, this is a string containing a date or time. Let's hit next on this. And it says, okay, which one is a date time variable? It doesn't know. So we'll say it's this one, and it's actually giving us a little preview. You can see it's just the first few records there. And the reason why it's doing that is it's saying which pattern does it match? Well, it doesn't exactly match this one because this one's got hyphens between it, but I think it shouldn't be too fussy. I mean, if this had slashes instead of that hyphens, it would exactly match that because it's the day number, the month as 3 characters, and then the year as four values there, 4 characters. I'm going to try that. Hit next and say that's it. And I'm going to give it input variable DOB, result variable. Again, I'll call it DOB. Let's call it DOB3. This is the format I want the output in. I'm going to give it a little label. Date of birth. Now, I know that this will generate at least one error message. And I've done this in the past, and it's just thrown an error message, hasn't worked at all. I'm not quite sure why, but I did test it this morning just to see if I was doing anything stupid. I know why it's throwing an error message. It's due to another problem that I introduced into the data that I could demonstrate, which is the fact that there's a bunch of blank rows buried inside this data file. It doesn't like a string field of blank rows. But let's see if it works. Hit finish here. Okay, so it's giving me some errors in here. It's saying, okay, I don't like this. It's saying 0, the number function is 0 length. That just means that's referring to the fields, the records of the blank rows. But is it at the end here? Yes, there it is. So it's been done. Date of birth 3 is now created there. So we don't need that. And we've got our date of birth 2, which is already done. We can get rid of that, and we can just change this to DOB, date of birth. And we got that. So we fixed that problem. So a couple of different ways in which you can deal with date fields there. One is, have a go at just forcing it by double clicking on it to the date format. If that doesn't work, then try and use the date or time wizard. And if that doesn't work, there are other things you can do, like a transform compute, which would allow you to separate out. And transform compute would allow you to separate out the days, months, and years of the string as separate fields, and then you could combine them together. It's a pretty old-fashioned way to do it, but it works pretty good. So these are all issues that we've had with the date formats. We said that was one of the most common sorts of areas that you have data formatting problems. What about problems with the data itself? Well, problems with the data itself we can address by going to a special procedure that we've got called the validation procedure, and it's under the data menu. And before I do that, I just want to get confused. I want to close down these syntax windows in the background. I'm actually going to close down the output as well because I've kind of want to start afresh. I've got the date field here, just the data window open here. I'm going to go to data and go down to this special validation procedure. And you can see there's 3 different procedures in here, which I'll come to in a bit more detail in a moment. But the procedure I want to run is this third one, validate data. It's really useful. Click on that. And the first thing it says is, have you got a case identifier variable, which means have you got an ID field? And if you have, that's useful because then it can tell you where the problem is that it's discovered, and tell you it's case ID 14 or case ID 15 or something like that. So I will define that as problematic. I'm going to assume there's nothing wrong with date of birth, so I'm going to leave that out and chuck everything else in. Everything else goes in as an analysis variable. What's it going to do at this stage? Well, you can see there's all these different tabs across the top. There's one thing here just called basic checks, and these are the default settings. These are the default checks that it will do. And it says flag variables that fail any of the following checks. So the first thing it says, look, I will flag a field if it's got 70% or more of the data is missing in it, because that sounds like it's probably quite problematic. So that's good. It says I will flag a field where the maximum percentage of cases in a single category is 95%. So that means if you've got a field where, it's got a bunch of different categories, but 95% of the data refers just to one category, I mean, that might be a bit of an issue. If you had like 10 different regions and 95% of the data only belonged to region 1 and the other 9 regions only belong to the remaining 5% of the data, might make it quite difficult to compare regions against one another. So you won't know about that. Maximum percentage of categories with a count of 1. So this is called high cardinality. That means, for example, if you had something like a product code, and you've got many, many, many unique product codes, it would flag that and say, look, you've got a field here where, you've got a lot of data. We've only got a count of 1. The value only occurs once in it, so it's almost like there's too much variability. And then the opposite situation here, minimum coefficient variation, minimum standard deviation, just basically flags situations where there's no variation in the data, where you got a scale field like age and everybody's the same age for they hardly vary. And then on top of that, it's going to look at the ID field and say, are there any cases in here where the ID is missing? And it's also going to flag up any duplicate IDs. Are there any fields here where they have the same ID? And it's going to flag empty cases where it says, are there any records or cases in here where you've got the ID field, but all the rest of the fields are empty? So it's doing just within this little window here, it's doing a bunch of checks for you. And you can actually ask it to give you a report on that. That's in the output. It gives you a little report on that. But you can also ask it to save things like as fields, like an empty case indicator, duplicate ID group, incomplete ID group. And that's quite useful because then you can see you can actually go back to the data set and see which cases have failed these tests or have been flagged up as potentially problematic. So we run that. Let's see what it says. Okay, so it's saying first of all, you've got a case where you've got a variable here where more than 95% of the cases all have the same value, and the variable is called city. Each variable is reported with every for every check it fails. So there's only one variable reported here. So I click on that. You can see it's this field here, city. If I right click on it and check descriptive statistics, we can see that actually there's 476 occurrences of just the city Chicago and then 3 blank. So it might well be you say, well, actually, that's invariant. I don't need that. Get rid of it. It's not unusual for that to happen. Hit clear. It just deletes it, gets out of it. Let's go back to the output. It also says you've got some duplicates here. You've got 2 duplicates or 2 cases with duplicates. And the cases have the following identifiers. They're employee code 20 and they're case number 20 and case number 21. So I could scroll down here and see them. There, there they are. 20, case number 20 and 21, both have the ID 20. You can see there is a slight difference here. That one of them has encoded gender with a capital F, one has encoded gender with a lowercase f, but the rest of the data looks identical. If we had loads of these and we didn't want to kind of look down through all of them, we could go to our indicator variables here that it's created for us. It's created these indicator variables for us. So it says, look, this is a duplicate case, and I could right click on that and just say sort descending order, and it would just sort all the ones that duplicates at the top. And I could say, okay, look, let's get rid of that one. That's a duplicate. I don't need that. Clear it. Okay. What else does it say? It says it says, okay, you've got missing city here, you've got duplicate IDs, you got a field here with a incomplete identifier. Case number 479 doesn't have an identifier. Let's have a look. Right, click that and say incomplete ID. Sort descending order. There you go. Let's look along the end here. This guy here. They were case number 479. I think that was the last record in there. So it was case number 479. Maybe I just take a punt on it and say, look, I'm going to assume that 479 is the ID for that and resort it. Sorting data just solves so many problems, as I'm sure you know. We can look down here. This 479 only occurs once. We can see there's 3 occurrences here of blank data here, apart from the variable job time. Ah, look at that. This wasn't flagged up because it wasn't 100% empty. That's really interesting because when I ran the job time procedure, it stuck in, of course, the mean value, put in the mean, remember it put in the mean value for that series. So that meant that it was non-empty. And as a result of that, it saw this one as non-empty, non-empty. Let me just see if I can let me just delete these and just run it again. Go back to it. So validate data. Let's go to this one. Let's go empty case, incomplete ID. Click OK on that. Let's run it again. Oh, look, now it's back again. Let's go sort descending order. Ah, see now it says because we removed those values that we imputed into job time. It says, okay, I'm now seeing these as empty cases. Again, I can just delete them and hit clear at that point. So we're working our way through this and cleaning up this data set as we're going, just using the validate data and just using the basic checks in the validate data. That's really useful. And the fact that we've got these little we can save these variables at the end is really useful to help us find and identify where these problems are occurring. What else can we do? Well, we actually have things called single variable checks and cross variable checks. So if I look at the single variable checks here, let's look at this. This is where I can create a rule. I find this really useful, just this little bit of output here, because it shows me the minimum and maximum. So I can see issues here with gender right away, back to someone in lowercase and uppercase. I can see, for example, that right away there's somebody here of 115 years of education in the maximum. That doesn't mean that there's only one occurrence of that. So I can just looking at the minimum maximums here, it's a really good way to spot any problems. Let us define a rule for education, making sure that nobody has more than a certain threshold below a certain minimum and above a certain value. You can see it will limit the number of cases scanned to 5,000, so you can switch that off. I haven't really found, even with 1,000,000 cases, I find it's pretty happy to scan them. So I would probably switch that off, even if you've got a really big data set. I hit define rules here, and I'm going to create a rule called education check. Just need to give the rule a name. And all I'm going to do is say, look, the minimum number of years of education should be 8, and the maximum should be, I don't know, 25, I'm guessing here. Do I want to allow non-integer values within the range? That is, non-integer means we're having decimals. So somebody's saying I've got 12.5 years of education. No, I don't want to allow that, so I'll switch that off. And hit continue. Does that save it? I think it saves it. Hit continue. Let's go to save here and complete the empty case and the duplicate validation rule. Place existing values output. Save single variable rules, define rules. Yeah, I think it's fine. Hit continue. Let's just see if it works. Click OK. Warning says I thought there was one here. Let me see if there's something at the end here. Empty case. Let me run it again. Sorry, folks. Let me just try it again. Validate data. Education 115. Define rule. Education check numeric minimum within range in a list. That's it. Hit continue. Save. I want to say validation rule, but it's grayed out. I'm not quite sure why. Let me see if I can go to output here. Is this something I'm not saving correctly? Looks okay to me. It's almost like it doesn't know I've created it. Something I'm not doing correct there. I'm not quite sure what it is. It doesn't seem to be turning on the option to identify the validation rule error. The other way to do it, of course, is to cheat and go to education and to sort it in order. So you could, you could just sort the education variable and say sort descending order here. I wanted it to flag this one field. It hasn't done it for me. Let me try another type and see if it's causing the same problem here in the other type. So if I go to validate data again, I'm going to go for another type of rule. I'm going to add in, maybe this will switch it on. This is called a cross variable rule. The cross variable rule is when you say, look, both these values are legitimate, but they contradict one another. And I'm going to create one called salary check. Let me see if this switches on. Salary check. And the rule is going to be, and it's somewhat dubious, but the rule is going to be that, the education, that the salary variable, the current salary variable, should not be lower than the starting salary variable. Now, in fact, that could happen, of course. You could be demoted, couldn't you? Or you could go part-time or something like that. But I'm just going to say, look, it says evaluate the one for an invalid case. So I say, if current salary, basically salary, is lower than beginning salary, that should be the rule, and it should flag a value of 1 for an invalid case should that happen. If I hit continue here, see it's saving this rule. I think I know what the problem is of education. The problem I had with the education rule was I have to check it to turn it on. That's right. So I define it, you check it, turn it on. That was the issue. Something as simple as that, a tiny little thing. You just have to check it. And then if we go to save, we can say, show me the validation rules. Very, very simple little schoolboy error there. Okay, so worth pursuing. Let's click OK at this point. And let's see what happens. So we click along the end here. Okay, so it's saying that there's a rule violation there right away, right at the start. But we saw this one. This was the people with the 115 years of education. We could guess that that's that's probably supposed to be 15 years of education. Are there any other rule violations? Let's sort descending order. Oh, look, there's another one here, and it says, okay, this rule violation here is somebody whose beginning salary is greater than their current salary. So that's a cross variable rule validation. You should bear in mind, because I've had issues with this in the past when I've tried to demonstrate this, when I save this file, it actually saves these rules into the file. So I'm trying not to save the files so the next time I demonstrate it, the rules aren't already there. So that's one way to use these validation command to validate the data using basic checks, single variable rules, cross variable rules, saving variables which indicate when these basic checks have been failed or when these validation rules have been failed. You can also ask for little violation reports here if you wanted to switch them on. All very useful. You should bear in mind though, if I go back to this and go to data and validation, you can see here it says you can define rules yourself, but you can also load predefined rules. If I click on that, and I say just load predefined rules, and you think, what is that about? Well, if I go back to data here and go down to validation, define rules, you can see that the defined rules that it has are things like it's making sure that things, for example, you could have a dichotomy rule saying that you should only have 0 and 1. You can have 1 or 2, 1 to 5. You can have one for day of the week and saying day of the week must be represented this way. So it basically comes with a bunch of rules. You got one for UK postcodes. So you can switch them on and cross variable rules. We've only got one here, which is salary check I've already created. So loading predefined rules basically means that you can have a whole bunch of rules that come with the that kind of come with the system itself. So these single variable rules you can click on and see them there. Don't give me any negative values. make sure the values run from 0 to 100, maybe they're percentages, something like that. So it just saves you the trouble of having to define them yourself. And it's well worth being aware of that the system does come with its own set of commonly applied rules. Okay, we've only got two other things we need to deal with here. One is this variable here, job cat. If we look at the variable job cat, which we renamed, one of the first things we fixed right at the start, if I right click on it, we notice there's only three cases here called who are interns. And it might be that you just want to get rid of them. You say we want to filter them out. Again, I did this in the last webinar, but it's something to be aware of, that a very common way to deal with irrelevant rows of cases is simply go to data, select cases, and say if condition is satisfied, and say, look, if employment category does not equal, and we can't remember the code here for interns, we just look it up and say, if it doesn't equal 4, that means basically keep it. There we go. Hit continue. And you could just filter them out. You could just filter them out and say select the cases of, and that would mean that they're still in the data set, but they're kind of ignored. You could copy the data set to a new data data set and give it a name. You know, something that's a new version of the data set. Or if you're feeling brave, you could just delete the unselected cases if you're quite happy to physically get rid of them. I'm going to get rid of them. Click OK. Go to job cat again, hit descriptive statistics, and now the 3 intern cases have gone. We've gone down to 472 records. And the last one, which is a very common issue, is inconsistency with coding. You remember the variable gender here has been coded up. Well, if I look at that, you got 211 cases of lowercase f, 3 cases uppercase f, 253 cases lowercase m, and 5 cases uppercase m. There's lots of different ways in which you could do this. You could use a recode procedure if you wanted, or you could do a compute procedure, which would and say I want to convert everything to uppercase. I'm actually going to do recode into same variables, so I'm going to overwrite it and just say gender, all the new values. And I'm going to say uppercase M should treat as lowercase m, and uppercase F, I want you to turn that to lowercase f. And you should just be able to do that, and it will ignore the other values. It should just work if I hit continue. If I'm doing this right, click OK. Let's see now, right click on it and run it. Now we only have lowercase f and m, which means that I can then go and attach some value labels to that and say, okay, in this historical data, m, male, and lowercase f, female. Okay. Check just run descriptive statistics again on the header of that particular field. And there we have it. It's correctly formatted. So we worked our way through that. Again, bear in mind that pretty much everything we do here could be encoded in syntax. And in fact, I've got an example of that. So now, syntax is a very important tool for cleaning the data cleaning with syntax. I've actually recorded a lot of the stuff that we've done here already. Let me just delete the output so you can see it from fresh. Let me start with a blank workbook, if you like, or a blank data sheet. That's the only thing we've got open now. And I'll open up the syntax that I created earlier on. Sample syntax, there we go, click open. It gets the data, it applies a data dictionary to it. It starts to rename fields and give them labels and that sort of stuff. Actually, I don't know if that's the right one. Is that one I've... Yeah, data cleaning, employee for data cleaning. I'll just make sure I've got the right one. I may have opened up the wrong syntax from it earlier. Yeah, I've opened it from the earlier webinar. Of course. Data cleaning. This is the one we want. Data cleaning syntax. Yeah. So it starts to renames that variable. It attaches missing values to the variable age. It changes the type from job time to numeric, so from string to numeric. It computes date of birth. It runs all of these procedures that we had run earlier on. If I just run all, it goes and basically goes through that and should clean up my data set. Let me see for me. Let's see if I've got this first. I'll get rid of that. That's closed. What's happened here? Let's say data cleaning SPSS is syntax. Just make sure it hasn't read the wrong file. Get the file. Okay, yeah. Well, for whatever reason, it got confused over which data file was open. But yes, it's done it now. Cleaned it all up for me. Created a new field called date of birth, and applied all of the changes there that I've applied myself in the past. And this is something I would do on a regular basis when I'm working with new data. It's much easier sometimes when you're cleaning data to use syntax if you're feeling confident with that, because of course it keeps a record of what you're doing as you're going along. And if you make a mistake, you can just go back and reread the file from the start and run everything in between until you get to the point whereby you made a mistake and make the correction. Okay, that concludes that particular session there on data cleaning with SPSS. You should be aware, of course, once again, we have lots of videos that record exactly webinars like this. We've got some FAQs to help you figure out what you've got installed. We've got information on the SPSS software and Eat Your Greens blog series on statistical testing and procedures. In the next session, we're going to be looking at significance testing with SPSS. It's something to bear in mind. Okay, somebody said here, I'm just going to check something. It says, when renaming multiple variables, would you list the variables in a list? For example, rename variable, current name, var name 1, new var name 2. No. I think if you look at the example, it's just a list of all the variables in order on one side of the equal sign, and then all the new names of all the new variables on the other side of the equal sign. But if you ever forget that, and I forget that stuff all the time, is I just click on the little help button, which is associated with that syntax command, because you type in like rename variables and you click on that syntax command, it will take you to an example of that. And I always look at the example to try to get it. So I'll just show you that. And you can get a copy of the syntax afterwards, absolutely. Just send us an email. But you see, for example, here, if I go to File, New Syntax, and I go to Rename Variables, see, it's popping up. This little button here, Syntax Help, should open up, take me precisely to that command, and there you can see there it says rename variables jobcat equals title. There will be other examples of rename. See, if I go down here to other examples, it will show me lots of different examples. There's actually, no, you're right. It's well, it does it either way. Look at that. That's fun. So this is how I've always done it. It actually seems to do it either way. You can do it in pairs, or you can do it in a list. So it's actually quite flexible. There you go. Even exchanging variable names. Yeah. So really, really useful procedure there. If you want to use the rename variables command or any other command, you want to find out examples of it, just click on it and it will take you to the help system. And I usually click on examples right away to see that. Okay, so lots of resources on our website. Bear in mind, we've got online training materials. We've got a recorded webinar specifically on syntax, for example, specifically on syntax and on writing syntax and on comments and creating batch jobs and all sort of stuff with it. And you should be aware, of course, that we have a range of different consultancy packages that we provide for people. And you can source your software directly from us. You can procure training and consulting services from us, and you can generally reach out to us and ask for no strings attached advice. I do hope you find that useful, and we look forward to you logging in again. Bear in mind that the next session starts at 3 o'clock. We're looking at how to correctly interpret significance tests. So do feel free to join that if you haven't already registered for it. Thanks very much.